Hello, everyone. And if this is your first session of the weekend, welcome to the Six Bridges Book Festival. And if you've been to several, I hope you're enjoying your time here so far. My name is Eliza Borné, and I'm the Director of Development at the Central Arkansas Library System. In my former career, I was editor of the Oxford American magazine, and for many years, I was fortunate to edit essays by Harrison Scott Key. And I've been a fan of Hannah Pittard's work since I received a copy of her debut novel, The Fates Will Find Their Way, in a first edition book club I subscribed to more than a decade ago. So these two writers are so talented, and we're so lucky to have them here in Little Rock to discuss their powerful, intimate, brilliant, funny, kind of weird memoirs. Harrison's How to Stay Married, the most insane love story ever told, and Hannah's We Are Too Many, a memoir, kind of. Harrison's How to Stay Married is Harrison's third book after Congratulations, Who Are You Again? And The World's Largest Man, which was the winner of the Thurber Prize for American Humor. He lives in Savannah with his 3 daughters and his wife, who along with him is the star of his comedic memoir about their failed and resurrected marriage. Here's what Christianity Today, a reviewing venue which makes perfect sense once you've read the book, has to say about it. If I could, I'd give everyone a copy of How to Stay Married. As I was reading it, my husband listened to me laugh aloud and begged to hear what was so funny. I read most of it in one night because the drama kept me flipping pages. When I'd finished the book, after reading at least a third of it aloud to my husband, we both wanted to try marriage counseling, like a tune-up, my husband said. It's not giving anything away to say that the big bomb dropped early in the book is that Harrison's wife, the sweet, funny, loving mother of their 3 daughters, a woman who spent just about every Sunday of her life in church, is having an affair with a family friend. This plot point is similar to what we learn at the beginning of Hannah's memoir, We Are Too Many. Her husband has slept with not just any other woman, but her best friend. Through a tapestry of revealing conversations, vignettes, and scenes, Hannah investigates what went wrong and how. The Los Angeles Review of Books calls it an unflinching account of a formative betrayal, also a surprising and often surprisingly funny meditation on time, truth, and grief. The writer Helen Ellis says it's Hannah's best book yet. You should all read Hannah's 4 previous books, all novels, and decide for yourself. Both Harrison and Hannah are return guests to the Six Bridges Book Festival, so let's give them a warm welcome back to Arkansas. We're gonna get started by, I'm gonna ask Hannah or Harrison, y'all can decide amongst yourself who starts. They're gonna read a few pages for us. Then I've got some questions, and y'all will have a chance to ask your questions too.
And you see why I'm still married. Oh, I'm going to make everybody laugh about this sad story. Okay. Thank you, Eliza. I have, I guess you could say performed. I mean, writers say read, but I've performed on this stage before and love coming to Little Rock, so thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank the band on the other side of the wall. Did y'all hear them earlier? Yeah, it's cool. It's like music. So I'm going to read a chapter that I've never read at an event, but because of the friend thing, like it was your best friend, it was my wife's best friend, a guy that I knew. So I thought I would read about him, the man that my wife had an affair with. This chapter is called Notes on Chad. That's not his real name. His real name is even worse than that. To start very generally, Chad is a man. He does not represent all Chads or even all men. We've all been dumped for Chads. The thing about Chads is we want to hate them. If you get dumped for an attractive Chad, you must reduce him to vanity. A rich Chad must be assumed vacuous. Your wife leaves you for a brainy Chad. Your wife leaves you for a brainy Chad. You have to believe he's a pedantic dullard. If he's a jock, then you must suppose he's a date rapist who oils his delts. This inborn desire to reduce Chads to less than human is troubling, but can be helpful in times of great distress, such as, for example, when being told that your wife is in love with one to whom you'd given all your dead father's fishing rods in an anguished gesture of kindness. Perhaps this penchant for dismissing the humanity of Chads is a survival mechanism, a vestigial, psychic, anti-inflammatory designed to keep the human heart from rending in two and the ego from dissolving into a froth of rage and self-loathing. Because when you first learn of the Chad in your own life, your immediate reaction is to compare. Is he richer than me, smarter, funnier, kinder, more caring, a better listener, more beautiful in a hot tub? These are the questions your partner's betrayal compels in you. They are nonsense questions, helpful to nobody, but you will ask them because the first thing that happens when you discover your partner is cheating on you with Chad is that you will go insane. In addition to going insane, you will feel pain that transcends all prior experience, pain without precedent, pain that burns away the sky. The pain did not make me cry, not yet. It did not make me rage and break things, not yet. What the pain did was detach my brain from my spinal column and kick it like a football into new galaxies. Everything I knew had to be unknown. Everything I did not know had to be learned. You never realize how much you know until you learn all of it was wrong. Chad had been a friend, my first real friend in Savannah. Who was this man? There is a hypothetical Chad, the abstract Chad, the potential Chad, lurking at the edges of every marriage, neighbor, colleague, family friend. And then there is the real Chad, the specific Chad, who has seen your wife naked. We must try to understand him. My particular Chad is not an evil man, though he committed acts that, without reserve, I will call evil. If this word evil makes you uncomfortable, then welcome to the party. I don't like sounding like a CPAC campaign ad any more than you do. I'm not sure Chad believes in evil. I'm not sure Chad believes in anything except perhaps the viability of Kid Rock as a political thinker. I'd vote for him, Chad once told me, though to be fair, he was high at the time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I met him in the winter of 2007, right after we moved to town. I just bought 3 young crepe myrtles for the new yard. That day, as I stood with a shovel surveying the young trees and their new holes for compositional balance, a man approached me with his big white dog, and the dog barked over and over. "Hush," was the first thing the man said. But the dog kept on barking. Sometimes I think the dog was trying to warn me. "Run, flee from this wicked place." The dog was saying, "You and all whom you love will surely die here." It didn't seem like a wicked place, and the dog's owner did not seem like a wicked man. "You must be my new neighbor," I said. "Welcome to the hood," the man said in a slight drawl. "I'm Harrison." I extended a hand. "I'm Chad." We got to talking, and I learned that he hailed from deep in the Georgia interior and had been living in Savannah for a few years now. I wouldn't have called him a redneck exactly, but after more than a decade spinning my wheels in the desperate urbanity of American higher ed, where all the Chicagoans in my Foucault seminar looked at me funny when I told stories about how, as a boy, I'd sometimes had to kill livestock with a woodworking tool, I found it refreshing to know, just by the sound of his voice, that my new neighbor probably didn't know who Foucault was. I liked him, or I wanted to like him instantly. Though, as I would learn, there was little else about this man to grab onto. He was vanilla ice cream without the vanilla, a cipher. He appeared intensely ordinary in every way, as if I do this, this is important. I wrote this because I want people to know, it's awful no matter who it is, and especially if he's boring. He appeared intensely ordinary in every way, as if every element of his appearance were designed to make you forget he was even there. His hair was neither blonde nor brown, his build neither heavy nor spry, his manner of dress supremely normcore, jeans, and one of those North Face fleeces they shoot from air cannons at SEC football games. and a face so excessively unremarkable that even now, after 7 years as neighbors, and so many moments conjuring his countenance in private that I could imagine melting it with a welding torch, I can scarcely find words sufficient to describe the man's visage. If he went missing and the police asked me to describe him for the APB, I'd have said, he's white. Sometimes I wonder if, in that moment when we stood in my new yard and God had instructed me to beat this man to death with my shovel to prevent the future betrayal, what would I have done? I would have laughed. Chad did not look capable of destroying a marriage. It had been a lifetime. I'll skip over that part. How could I have known everything that would come to pass between Chad and my wife? What I didn't know and couldn't see is that underneath the abjectly uninteresting facade of this man beat the heart the world's greatest romantic. The man was a fucking poet of love, and nobody knew. But my wife knew. Over the years, I was a good neighbor to this guy. I let him borrow my chainsaw. I listened to him complain about the rising cost of Michelob Ultra. I didn't ridicule his love for Kid Rock, at least not in front of him. In summer, I found no call to mock Chad's cargo shorts. I could have, but I didn't. Not then, not now. People who like Kid Rock also like cargo shorts. This is a law of nature. I wish I could tell you that Chad was a convicted pederast who trafficked children out the back of a Chuck E. Cheese, or that he had many prominent moles, but the truth is he was a quiet, hardworking IT professional who repaired software for small businesses and only had one prominent mole. He enjoyed yard work and fishing and throwing the baseball with his young son and occasionally smoking a little reefer in his garage when the kids weren't around. He was several inches shorter than me, but I never held this against him, and clearly neither did my wife. His only real crime, at least up until the moment he did his best to destroy his family and mine, is that he was rather dull. He spent most of his free time in the yard. I never said a word about the continual electric scream of his leaf blower because my religion says to let those things go. Saturday mornings, I would come home from writing at the cafe, and there he'd be, frightening off all the birds. "Yard looks good," I'd say. "Thanks," he'd say. Weekend afternoons, we'd stand there with a beer and discuss sod placement. We didn't have much else to say. I would have preferred a more interesting neighbor, somebody with an eclectic taste in films or books, or at least someone with a pair of jet skis and a basic grasp of irony. I'd have been fine with a conspiracy theorist or a flat earther. I can work with delusion. But Chad didn't even have the courtesy to be strange. He was just there. Love your neighbor as you love yourself, Jesus tells me. And I tried in my feeble and distracted way to love Chad. I asked him about his former life in rural Georgia and what led him to choose a career in IT, but hardly got anything in return. Speaking with him in the yard about the absurdities of contemporary American life felt like trying to discuss the novels of Gabriel Garcia Marquez with a cadaver. Most people don't care about magical realism, which is fine. Most of us on this planet don't get to have enough money to choose our neighbors. You get what you get. At least our kids got along. Our wives were close. We cooked out in the backyard and remarked on the heat. I'd stand there and watch Chad put away a dozen wings and never once hazarded the notion that my wife might in secret be burning for this man. A Spotify algorithm had more charm. I don't want to be ugly. I could tell you that he seemed about as deep as bro country and possessed all the charm of an unsalted potato. But this would be a literary description powered by resentment. The truth is, he seemed a decent father, a good neighbor. We were friends, or at least friendly. His wife, Lane, was one of those funny nurses with a tattoo who always had a glass of wine and loved telling stories of healthcare grift and medical incompetence. She was more talkative, more outgoing, curious, always asking me questions about my work at the university, about my writing, about the girls. She and Lauren were best friends. She always made a tomato pie and American flag cakes on the 4th and told the girls how cute they looked. She laughed fully and often. Chad didn't laugh much. For many years, I believed his vacuity was merely a natural introversion. But now I know this belief was wrong. I tried to be his friend. He tried hard not to be mine. If there's a Chad in your life, then you bet you're that Chad's Chad too. He's likely reduced your humanity long before you've ever reduced his. It's the only way he can go full Chad on you with your wife in secret. He's got to believe you're a cruel spouse, derelict, vain, vacuous, pedantic, whatever. You can bet Chad hates you. Maybe that's why he never had much to say to me. It's hard to be vulnerable with the husband of the woman you covertly dream of marrying. Maybe he'd had to make himself hate me. I am told he occasionally referred to me over many years of their clandestine romance as a, quote, big fat walrus. Fair enough. For years, I was very big and quite fat. Like a walrus, I have whiskers and have been known to emit guttural barks at people until they throw food at me. And like these gregarious sea mammals, I too can be violent when provoked. The 1918 memoir by Donald Baxter Macmillan, 4 Years in the White North, detailing the Crocker land expedition of 1913 to 17, describes a walrus attacking a boat and killing all aboard. One can only assume the boat was full of Chads. What can I say? I am the walrus.
Hey, y'all. It's my worst nightmare to have somebody say that I would be like vanilla ice cream without the vanilla. It's like horrible. My book has some profanity in it, and I'm going to use it today. Thanks. That's awesome. Cool. So here's what you need to know about this section. My book is told in 3 parts, and the first third is remembered conversations. You know, I don't think I'm alone in this. There are some conversations I just can't get out of my head, and especially right after I found out what I found out, it wasn't just my best friend, it was actually the woman who introduced me to my husband. So there were a lot of layers of betrayal that I was dealing with, but when I found out, I went back a decade and started remembering everything. And those are the conversations that take up part 1 of this book. And part 2, and I think I'm not alone in this habit either, potentially, I had a lot of imaginary conversations with my ex-husband after he'd done what he'd done. And I appropriated him, right? And in these conversations, I decided to change him and make him who I thought he was now, you know, what he might have learned. And the person he was having a conversation with was the person I'd become on the other side of the betrayal and on the other side of the divorce. And I think that's one reason why we call it a memoir, kind of, because a third of the book is my imagination. But my imagination is real, so that is a memoir. So in the second part, I'm talking to him. This did not happen. It happened in my head. He never said a word. But I think it also captures the nature of what it was like to be married to me and what it was like to be married to him. All right. He says, let's start with my affair. I say, that only seems right. He says, your insistence that Trish made the first move is entirely wrong. I dislike that you've included a fictionalized version of the event that contradicts my own account. Your narrative that I got off the plane from Paris and that she stood in front of me in a mirror and groped my hair, that's 100% fantasy. We got drunk. I touched her foot with mine under the table. She responded. We were at a bar. Her husband was with us. He missed everything. That was the secrecy. The secrecy was half the turn on. After that, things happened quickly. I say, but that she was responsive at all. You were married to her best friend. She was married to yours. She had no right. He says, you didn't want to have sex with me. You also didn't want anyone else to have sex with me. I say, I've considered that possibility. Maybe it's a female problem. I'm not saying men don't also get bored. Of course they do. But there's something that happens to women in long-term monogamous relationships. At least, I'm assuming I'm not the only one. Maybe I am, which is a lonely thought, but my assumption is that it's what a lot of us do. We fall in love with a man and then, out of fear of losing him, out of determination to win, or maybe to prove some sort of female supremacy by nailing down the guy who everyone else couldn't, we make ourselves invaluable. We do the laundry, we do the cleaning, we say when the man wants to help, I don't mind. I like it. It's easy for me. And the man, happy not to help, because who wouldn't want to be waited on if they could and for free, he says, I know hundreds of women who would pull their hair out, or as you might say, chew their hands off, if they were accused of behavior as backwards as this. Those same women would probably also tell you to grow a pair and stop taking care of men. This is a problem you alone create. This isn't women. I say, let me finish. So there's this man who has allowed himself to become a kind of fatted hen. He says, that's not a thing. Fatted hen is not a known idiom. You still speak like a foreign mistress from a Roth novel. It's endearing. I say, so there's this man who's allowed himself to get comfortable. And of course, there's also this woman who has encouraged the man to get comfortable. Days go by, weeks go by, eventually months and years go by. One day, the woman looks up from the sink and sees her reflection in the dark of the glass. He says, this is very Atwood, very the female body. I say, and she hears her husband upstairs in the second bedroom, which was turned into his study, even though she's the published author and not him, and he's playing his stupid fucking dobro again with its tinny fucking sound that makes her want to grind her knuckles into shards of glass, and she thinks to herself, why the fuck am I doing these dishes? But it doesn't end there. The madness doesn't stop, because the woman, after this first night, doesn't say anything. She doesn't let her grievances be known. Instead, she thinks, well, after all, when I clean the dishes, they actually get clean. And when I fold the clothes, they actually get folded. And anyway, if I don't start the next load now, it'll be days before he does. And I want to wear that shirt tomorrow, so I guess I'll go ahead and do it myself. And really, what's the big deal? She talks herself down that first night, scrubbing and wiping and spraying and putting away. And by bedtime, the hysteria has dissipated. The problem is, it happens again a few nights later, and then again the night after that. Suddenly, though she started muttering vague dissatisfactions under her breath when he goes right upstairs after dinner, and she knows he can hear the muttering, it's happening all the time. All she can think now is, why the fuck? There isn't even a fundament. He says, you learned that word from me. I say, to be honest, he doesn't even have to do anything wrong anymore. He can, for instance, make her a smoothie and hand it to her just after she's home from a long run, and as she accepts it, she looks over his shoulder at the Vitamix, at the viscous green goo dripping down its sides, the vegetable debris scattered all across the counter, the coconut milk with its lid still off. All she can think is, why the fuck? And so maybe this is where he begins to detect there might actually be something wrong, something missing, something he can't quite put his finger on. At first, he doesn't try to talk about it either. Talking is just so direct, you know? So instead, he starts doing nice things for her. He buys her flowers, he brings her a glass of wine while she's reading at her tiny desk, which is shoved between the television and the bookcase in the corner of the living room. He rubs her feet while they're watching a show. He kisses her shoulder for no reason at all. But no matter how many of these nice gestures he performs, the thing that's missing remains missing. It's like there's a deadness all over her skin, in her eyes, and her voice even. And so finally, feeling like he's going a little mad himself, having become so accustomed to the way she'd previously adored him, having in fact learned to take that adoration for granted, he asks her, are you okay? And she says, of course. And he says, it's just, and she says, really, I'm fine, I promise, it's fine. But all the while, all that's there, all that's going on in her mind at all is, why the fuck, why the fuck, why the fuck? A freight train of hatred roaring in her brain. Then one night, because she's told him she's okay, and because, truth be told, he's gotten kind of used to the vacancy in her eyes and voice, maybe he even likes it, because this version does seem a little less opinionated than the prototype, he slips his hand under her tank top after she's turned off the bedside lamp, and then tries to run his fingers down the length of her torso and under the elastic of her underwear. But this is the last straw. This is the thing she doesn't want to fake anymore, and so she doesn't. Simple as that. Her hand grabs for his before his fingers can do the things that they want to do, and she finally screams aloud the words that have been with her for so long now. Why the fuck? He says, wow, you actually hated me. I hadn't realized that before. Wow. She says, I hated me. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Hannah and Harrison. So, wow, these are both really difficult books, as I think you're gathering. They're raw, they're painful to read because of the pain experienced by the characters, which is to say the two of you. They're juicy, they're funny, they're absurd. So I want to get to some of that, but first I want to start somewhere else. Y'all both married people who had affairs. You both decided to write about the experience and share it with the world. And you both dedicated your books to your dogs. So I thought we would start with the dogs. Tell us about Elmer and Gary.
What's your dog's name?
Elmer T. Lee, named after the bourbon. My vet hated that I gave him a different last name. Used to drive her crazy.
Really?
Yeah.
Gary is my chocolate lab and my biological son. We got him, he was a pandemic puppy. We got him in March of 2020, or no, sorry, early May. He was born in March of 2020. I wrote a story about dogs for Garden and Gun that came out earlier this year. If you want to learn about Gary, you can read that story. I think it's online. But I will say what I so love about Gary, I mean, he's awful, you know. I mean, like most labs are, they eat everything and all that. But I have 3 daughters, and they're all teenagers now, and so I can't hit them on the butt playfully anymore. You guys are like, is he serious right now? You know, like, I don't know. I grew up in a house of boys, and you know, when they were little, and you know, heading out on the soccer field, I'd smack them in the ass. You know, I cannot do that anymore. But I can touch Gary wherever I want to. So he's very affectionate. He is the most affectionate person in my family besides me. I crave touch. I love to touch and hug and squeeze and kind of wrestle and like body slam things, and I can do that with Gary. So he has like absorbed a lot of like my whatever it is that I have. So my family's really grateful for him, and I will often, whereas like I would touch my wife and I'd be like, and she would just sometimes cringe. You know, I would expect you to know what that feels like. And because
I'm cringing right now.
She does not like to be touched by any, like even her children. She's like, okay, you can touch me. The children can hug me like a little bit. And so I'll just like sit down on the floor and then just like pet Gary, and like we have a moment and I get that out and I don't have to inflict that on my wife. And so Gary has been very good for my marriage.
There is something in the New York Times right now. It could be the Atlantic, but I think it's the New York Times about touching and how in long-term relationships, how it becomes, and I love that they didn't put a gender to it. They're like, and in the relationship, there is often one person who starts to think that touch always means sex and so recoils. And I'm like, and that one person is the wife.
The woman, yes.
Let's just be honest, because I could touch my boyfriend husband. I'm not married, but we call him boyfriend husband now. I could touch him right now and he'd be like, sex? That's okay.
Gary's like that
it can
about
mean
playing.
sex.
What's different, I did read that article. Did anybody else read that article? That was definitely my wife and me. Except it's not just to initiate sex; it's to annoy her constantly.
Yeah.
And that's like if she's washing dishes.
And you know it's annoying her. You admit to that. You're like, I'm going to keep doing it.
Right.
Dude.
Now, I wash dishes more than she does. So much more. Now. But when she's washing the dishes, I will like put my arms around her and and it's not affectionately. It's like, I say that it's affectionately, it's awful. So I was very convicted when I read that piece. And I was like, all right, Gary, it's just you and me, buddy. So I put my arms around Gary affectionately. Thank you for asking.
You know, that's really funny. My boyfriend husband does that now. He'll I'm cooking or I'm doing the dishes, and he does most of the dishes. That's why I'm in a relationship. I could do the cooking and he cleans. But he'll come up every once in a while and like put his arms around me and like usually grope me. And he's like, you like it, it's helping you. And I'm just like,
That is awful.
This tomato sauce is about to go all over your face. But can I talk about Elmer real quick?
Please.
Okay, cool. Elmer, I got Elmer with my ex-husband in 2008, and he died in 2017. And I have this really bad history of getting dogs with men, and this is why I'll never have another dog. When I was probably 22, I got a Boston Terrier with this guy who I knew I was going to break up with, knew we were going to break up, and I knew getting this dog going into it, I was like, future Hannah is warning you right now, do not get this dog. And we got the dog, and I fucking loved that dog, right? And it became our little child, and you know, we took it everywhere. We could flip it in its back, and I lived in Savannah at the time, and every time I wanted to break up with my boyfriend, I would just look at that dog and think, I can't leave because of the dog. And so eventually, this is how much I hated that boyfriend. I left and he got the dog. He was mean. He said, I can't sleep without the dog. And I was like, you are a manipulative, bad person.
What a baby. He can't sleep without a little
the
dog.
Right?
That's so stupid.
So I get, and if the dog hadn't actually liked him, and if I hadn't thought that he'd give the dog a great home, I wouldn't have let it happen. But I did, and it was horrible heartbreak. And then I started dating this other guy who eventually became my husband. And before we got married, we got another dog, and I knew it. I was like, don't do this, Hannah. Do not get this dog, because I loved that dog. And one of the reasons now I don't have another dog is not because I don't want to leave my boyfriend husband, but because I don't love people the way I love animals. I just don't. I think that dogs especially are amazing, and I see a sad dog on the street, and dogs look at me like I think there's something going on with me. It's been this way all my life. Everyone always notices it. I'm at a bar, like an outdoor bar, dogs stare at me, and I'm like, I know, dog, I know. It's okay. It's weird. But
You're weird.
Thanks.
All
Thanks
right.
for coming to our dog panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, you thought you were coming to the adultery panel. It's the dog panel. Okay, had to get the dogs out of the way. In his book, Harrison writes, my highest virtue has always been radical transparency to a fault. The book you're holding is proof of that. This, I believe, is how you heal. Banish sorrow by shining light on it. Tell us more about that.
Ugh. Feelings. Anyway, about Gary. I definitely I don't want to sound weird. Like, I definitely can. I'm not completely transparent. Let's get that out of the way. Like, I have a lot of feelings that I'm not constantly sharing with people, because you have to be a professional and get along in this world. But I do find it very difficult to keep secrets. I could never cheat on my wife. I couldn't do it. I'd do it, and I would just call her, be like, hey, I just cheated on you, FYI. Is anybody else like that in here? I have other crimes. I have other things wrong with me, like so many things. Like, you guys know. And I talk about those in the book, but I cannot, those are pretty vocal and obvious. Like, everybody knows what's wrong with me. You can tell immediately if you hang out with me at a party. Like, oh, this guy is arrogant, or this guy has weird opinions, or this guy won't shut up. Like, it's very, and I like that people know the bad things about me, so I don't have to hide them from you. And so that's a piece of it. And I do feel like, for me, I'm a verbal processor. I have to talk. I don't know. Are you like this? I have to talk to know what I think. Are you like that? Do you have to write to know what you think about things? Sorry, I won't ask any more questions. We rehearsed this. I do not know what I think until I say it out loud. So that's where my writing comes from. It comes from saying what I think. If you're really, I know I have these general feelings of anger, but then you write the angry letter. Sometimes you don't mail it, you just write it, and you're like, yes, that is how I feel, and then you burn the letter, or you send it, either one. And so for me, a lot of my writing comes from that place of, I have to say how I feel to know how I feel, and if I do it in a way that's funny, I can sell it for money.
I like that you made that rhyme. Can I talk to him real quick before you? Yeah, so I am definitely the secret keeper. I'm a professional secret keeper. I love keeping secrets. It's really essential to me that very few people know me. But I perform as somebody who is divulging all the time. And I think, there's this extreme sense of hiding and an extreme desire to be perceived as being incredibly open. But one of the things, my ex-husband wasn't able to lie to me either. And I knew that if he ever cheated, he would tell me. And he used to say this thing, I actually thought this was pretty charming. He said that he could never see a prostitute, not because of me and what it would do to our relationship, because he was scared of getting mugged and having his wallet stolen if he fell asleep. And I was just like, that's weird on so many layers. But because he was willing to say weird things like that to me that feel very vulnerable and honest, I actually always knew that if he cheated, he would tell me. And on the day that I found out, he called me, and he this conversation is in there, but he said, so I hear you know that I had sex with Trish. And I said, yeah. And it started with him admitting it. And I've always been grateful because I've known quite a few people whose marriages have gone through affairs and they've ended. I know very few people who have come out on the other side of it, but none of those people were told the truth immediately, and that makes you feel kind of crazy, like you're being gaslit. Other people have told you, there have been witnesses, and I was so immediately grateful when he said he was having an affair. It was such a gift to me because I could move on immediately, and I did. I moved on immediately.
The other piece of that is the writing of it and the confessing of it, and that's sort of what that quote that you read gets at. And I used to not think that writing was like therapy, and I still don't. They're like each other, but they are definitely not the same thing. But I can say very much for me in the 3 books that I have written, the writing was definitely a way to expose things that were inside of me that I felt were going to kill me if they stayed inside of me. Most people just get therapy, which is easier and cheaper and quicker than writing a book and going on a world tour about it. So I think just my love of entertainment and comedy and stories and reading kind of weirdly melded with this other desire not to keep things trapped inside. And so now I've made a career of sort of doing those things at the same time. But I will say, and I kind of said this to you guys last night, I'm definitely over it for a while. I'm over being radically transparent for a while. My first 2 books were just prologue and rehearsal for this third book. I've been writing about myself and saying kind of slightly embarrassing or, sometimes difficult, like child abuse and stuff like that. But like, I've been writing about myself for a long time and making people laugh about it and sort of having this public therapy where I deal with all this trauma and then in some way help people deal with theirs. Like I wrote my first book, my dad died in that book, and I wrote a lot about him and a lot of people with dads, which turns out to be all the people ever born. Messaged me like, oh man, that really helped me deal with my dad dying. And, so that makes me feel good. I'm like, oh, okay, so like whatever I was processing was universal. Like that was good. That transparency did help me shine a light on that thing. But with this third book, it has been, I don't know about you, but it's been intense. The messages and emails I get from strangers who ask me to call them, they give me their number. Please call me. I just found one, I hope you're not here if I'm telling this example. A woman said, it's so sad. We shouldn't be making fun, but we will. She said, I am a librarian. And so it was already kind of funny because just starting off like that. I know we have a lot of librarians here, so it's cool. She's like, I'm a librarian. I saw your book at the library and thought it looked interesting. When I got home, I found my husband of 30 years in bed with our pastor. That's a transition. Like, I saw your book, it looked interesting. I got home and she said, and I can't tell anybody, it's a female pastor. She's got the best job of her life, she said, at our church. And if I tell anybody, she's gonna be fired and it's gonna ruin her life. And I was like, wow, you are very selfless thinking of her. It was weird. I get messages like that almost every week. Definitely every week, but some that are weird like that almost every week. And it's very heavy, and I'm not a therapist. And it's very intense. My wife, who wrote a chapter in our book, she gets messages like that. So, most of them are very encouraging. Like you get like, wow, thank you for talking about marriage, and I don't feel so alone. Like you read that and you're like, thumbs up emoji. Like that's great. But the heavy ones are a little too much, and I have unleashed a lot of radical transparency in other people that I would like to not be involved in.
Yeah, those direct messages don't bother me, and I think it's because no dog is like Instagramming me about their love life. We were talking about this last night. I get messages mostly from women, but from some men, telling me their own story. And I speak about my eating disorder in here. And, I think especially with eating disorders, there's a real desire to share once you've met someone who's had one, your experience with it. And I'm like, that's awesome. Can you post on social media how much you liked my book? And Harrison's just like, I really need take some moments and deal with this other person's grief. And I'm like, can you help me sell books?
I think
if this resonated, please.
I have become.
And do you have a dog?
I've become more empathic as a result of writing this book, and it's very painful, and I do not like it.
Well, and I think it's so interesting that you're coming to the tail end, at least a moment. You need, a break from your radical honesty, and I feel like I'm just getting started. Like the next book that I finished, it's a kind of follow-up to this, and I call it autofiction, and it's about this 43-year-old woman named Hannah, who's found out that her ex-husband has just signed a contract for his debut novel, and she's sort of the star of it, and she's insecure and smug, and she allows this discovery to slowly drive her crazy. And what I love about this idea of autofiction is I feel like I'm actually saying some really, really vulnerable stuff in here, and when I go around and I'm interviewed for it, I'm gonna be like, that's just the character. That's the character with the Rolodex of penises. That's not real.
I tried to make this book a novel. I tried to do autofiction.
Oh, I tried to do a novel too.
I knew nobody would believe it if it was a novel because they'd be like, that would never happen. And so I was like, I can't do that. Because it would be at a book festival, people would be like, did any of this happen in real life? I'd be like, yes, it all happened. I would start crying. And then I would roll off the stage and die.
I tried writing mine as a novel too. I tried it from her perspective. I tried it from his perspective. I tried it from mine. And they just never landed. None of them, there were no stakes when I was finally telling my story as fiction. I just couldn't get behind it.
Well, here's a question that I'm sure I'm not the only one that is wondering this. How have your books been received by your respective communities? Are your friends and families happy for you and for your success with your books and where you
gonna
are
go
in your
first?
lives
I'll go
right now?
first.
Okay.
Are they worried about you? Are they mad at you?
I feel like Harrison's going to have a 15 to 20-minute answer, so I'm going to take this one first. He's not a brief man. Yeah,
Wow,
like
Thank you for that introduction.
Thank
I'd
you.
like to have a few words I'd like to say.
Yeah, my family loves it. My family loves it. My sister loves it because she's one of the few people whose names I didn't change. Also, my mother, and both of them tend to steal scenes when they're in it. So they're just absolutely charmed. And I think my family is also kind of perplexed by it because I do keep so much like a secret, and I'm very a private person. I have no idea how my ex-husband thinks of it, or I couldn't possibly say. But yeah, my friends have been pretty supportive, and that's my brief answer.
Are you ceding your time to me? Okay, so some of our friends knew the story. If you've read the book, like obviously we talked to people about this. We have this small circle of friends, and really they're the people who matter most to us. All the people who mattered the most to us knew about this story and knew what was happening in it. So nothing in this book surprised them, and they weren't really surprised by my wanting to write the book either. But when I finished the manuscript and Lauren had just finished her chapter, and that's a whole other conversation about her writing a chapter. I originally wanted her to just annotate the whole book, and write something on every page. But we knew that we needed to tell everybody in our community what was happening. We didn't want it to be a bombshell to these people who mattered to us, and so we had a thing at our church, and our church factors into our story a lot, but it was not a church event. It was not a Sunday thing. We had a lot of, most of my pagan friends were there too, and we invited them in because we wanted to sort of have this conversation. And so it was almost like an invitation-only reading. The book wasn't out yet. It wouldn't be out for 9 months. And I read a little bit, and then Lauren read her entire chapter, which is really powerful. It's so good. And she doesn't feel compelled to have a joke every 5 sentences like I do. It's really awesome. And then we had sort of a Q&A after that Soren, who's another character in the book, kind of led. And after that, lots of people were crying. There were some people who would not make eye contact with either of us for months because it's scary. Talking about infidelity and knowing that it's happening in your community is very scary, especially if you've never had that happen. Once you hit a certain age and you've seen a lot of that happen, you're not as shocked. But in your 30s and 40s, when that starts happening, it is scary. And there were especially men who would not talk to me, did not know how to talk about it. They were so scared. And we talked to our children about all right, we're going to do this thing at church. There's nothing in this book that our children, none of the big plot points that they don't know. They were there for all of it. But I have had to sort of be careful about how the book came out and how we were talking about it and how people reacted to it. And that's my short answer. Screw you.
Yeah, right on. Cool.
All right, well, I kind of wish we had an
this way.
extra hour with these guys, but we actually only have 10 minutes, so I want to give the audience time to ask your questions. Would anyone like to come up to a mic? Make any confessions, have any therapy? Okay, well then I'll just keep going.
My advice for reading my book, not less so Hannah's book, is take the cover off when you read it in public.
Because so many people are going to want to talk to you about it, Harrison?
Yes, and it'll scare your children. Your spouse may be wondering why you're reading that book. Just take the cover off. It's easier.
I think you should definitely leave the cover on mine and then say, have you read this book? You need to go buy it.
question. And though I did have that thought, I've been carrying Harrison's book around for the last week or so, and wondering.
Is everything okay at
is
home,
everything
Eliza?
okay at home? And yeah. So both of these memoirs, as you're probably gathering, move back and forth in time. They include some narrative and stylistic surprises, like we've spoiled the appearance of Lauren's chapter. But I want to talk about Hannah's book. Her book has a particularly inventive structure. And one of my favorite novelists is Emma Straub. Follow her on Instagram. She's a novelist. She's got a couple of bookstores in Brooklyn, and I always make note of what she's recommending. And she recommended Hannah's book early on, I think before it came out, or right around the time it did come out, by calling it form demolishing, which I loved that description. I would agree with that assessment. And I just wanted to talk to you about why you chose to tell your story in the way that you did.
Yeah, so this is funny. We were talking about this last night as well. Harrison and I were, when you write about divorce or infidelity or marriage, that's mostly what people just want to talk to you about, the story itself, as opposed to the craft and the decisions that you made in it. And so the first third, those conversations, it looks like a play. I mean, it very much looks like a play. And one of the reasons that I wanted to have that play-like structure is because I wanted the dialogue to stand out and to sort of tie both my hands behind my back and not be allowed to ascribe motivation to why anybody might have said what they said to me, because writing my book and not doing it openly, my ex-husband did know that I was working on a memoir, but I didn't seek his input. I didn't want his input. I was very much trying to tell my story. And so I wanted to just let you, the audience, hear what I had heard, and for you to interpret, have a chance to interpret it on your own, and not say, and then she said this to me because she was being mean. You know, that's maybe she was being mean. I don't know, but I cannot say that that is why she or he or anybody else said the things they did to me. So that first section is very intentionally without motivation. It's just the dialogue. And then you heard a little bit of the second section. And the final one, it's the most traditional in many ways. It's short vignettes told in first person. And it's only over the course of doing these interviews and being on tour that I've really started to understand something that accidentally happened with this book, that from the time you move from the first section to the third section, you're getting closer and closer to my voice. And I'm slowly I am finally sort of getting rid of the noise. I'm getting rid of the other conversations in my head, the other voices in my head. And at first, in that first part, it's my best friend, it's my mom, it's my sister, who, when I've told her, the first thing my sister said was, I never liked her anyway. And I was like, please don't make this about you, you know? And so it was like getting rid of those voices. And the second section, it was my ex-husband, because he's the one who knew me best, who I'd spent most of my life with. And it was, you know, getting through his voice. And at the end, I am finally able to speak, I think, most vulnerably. And it's just me talking about me and trying to figure out why I might have put myself in this position and stayed for so long in spite of lingering doubts, fears, or worries that what eventually did happen was going to happen.
So I want to read one of my favorite passages from Harrison's book. The reality is that every marriage is a partnership of two broken assholes with good intentions and varying degrees of ability to deliver. Marriage is as much a mystery to me now as the origins of the universe and the laws that govern the behavior of matter. What makes one work is just as strange as what makes one not. But I possess more information now than I had when all this began. So I would pose this to both of you. What do you know now about marriage that you didn't when you got married?
You always, this is not an original thought to me, but you something that I know now is you always marry the wrong person. Your spouse, if you're married long enough, your spouse will be married to about 5 or 6 different versions of you. And those versions are often far more different from one another than you think they are, even though you have the same social security number as all of the other versions. That's one thing I've learned.
Yeah, I think it's so subjective, right? Because I know people who've been married for 50 years, and I don't know what infidelities might have existed. I think with some of them, there were infidelities. And these are very happy people who seem really satisfied to be still with one another. That said, I was recently emailing with an old student of mine, and he was telling me that this woman that he was madly in love with, that he was thinking maybe she's the one. I think he's like in his early 30s. She broke his heart, right? Just like left it in flaming bits. And I wrote back to him and I said, "You're not asking for advice, but I will tell you, the closer you can get to 50 without being married, the more chance you have of actually finding somebody who you really, really want to be with." But again, that's just my subjective answer. I'm glad that I was married, and I'm glad I got divorced, because every single day that I'm in the relationship that I'm in now, it is a deliberate decision that I'm there, and I do not, I say that I like secrecy, and I absolutely do, but I do not fake things. I do not lie about things. If something is irritating me, I'm going to talk it out, and that can be annoying for both of us, but I just never want to do what I did before, which was 10 years of believing that I was the stronger person because I was repressing things and dealing with it. Like, so much of my marriage was, I can handle it, I can handle it, I can handle it. And it was actually my therapist, who I saw just for a little bit amount of time, but she was so great. But my therapist was the one, when I told her that for the first time, she was like, "Hannah, that's not strength. That's just you being a coward." You never said, I mean, I hate blue cheese dressing. I hate it. I hate it. And when we started dating, when my ex-husband and I started dating, blue cheese dressing, we'd split a salad, and he'd get blue cheese dressing. And I would say, for the first 12 times, I'd be like, "I don't like blue cheese." We'd go out again. He'd get blue cheese dressing that we're splitting. I taught myself to like blue cheese dressing. Do you know how insane that is? I mean, now I genuinely like it, but what the fuck, right? What the fuck?
And I would say,
Yeah, that dude was not paying attention. There's a terrible passage in the book where he spins
The lamb?
The lamb.
The
Yes,
lamb.
blows their food budget on lamb, and Hannah doesn't even like lamb.
We're broke. We're broke. I mean, so fucking broke. And he won't get a job because he refuses to get a job that doesn't use his advanced degree. And meanwhile, I've been waiting tables, finally sold a book, and magically have a teaching job. And I'm like, "Please just get us a job. We just need a little bit of money, just to pay for food, And he goes to Whole Foods. Why would he go to Whole Foods when we have $50 for the week? And he came back with these 2, they were gorgeous, lamb chops, right? And the first thing I see is the price, and it's $47. And I said, were these on sale? And he said, "I don't know if they were on sale." And I was like, "But the $47, is that how much you paid?" And he was like, "Yeah, that's how much I paid. That's what's there." And I was like, "What else is in the bag?" So I take it out, and there's a sprig of rosemary and an onion, and I'm like, what are we gonna do with this? This is our money for the week. And I left to walk the dog and call my sister, and I was like, "Greta, do you know that I don't like lamb?" And she was like, "Everyone knows I don't like lamb. You don't like lamb. Nobody in our family eats lamb." And I was like, do you think that my husband knows I don't like lamb?" And she's like, "Of course he knows." And I said, "Well, do you think it's weird that he would buy lamb knowing that I don't like lamb?" And she says, "Hannah, I don't want you to get mad at me." And I was like, "Then maybe don't say whatever you're going to say." And she's like, "He doesn't think about things." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "He doesn't think about you." And then I stayed married for 6 more, or however long, I don't know. It's horrible.
so back to the blue cheese. So this is what's so mysterious about marriage. Some would say that you, like eventually, like learning to like blue cheese, that's marriage, right? Everybody in here who's married does crazy, weird stuff they never would have done.
Compromise,
Right?
yeah.
And then other people would say, like, wow, like you standing up and saying, like, I do not like blue cheese, stop it, or lamb chops, that's marriage, right? Like two people learning to see each other and to help each other in their blindnesses, right?
And I would say, like, a compromise would be, he heard me say, I don't like blue cheese, and, like, could we get half with balsamic drizzle and half with,
Right.
ranch with blue cheese crumbles? Like, I loved a blue cheese crumble. I love that. I used to work at a steakhouse. I highly recommend getting the balsamic drizzle with the blue cheese crumble. Best of both worlds.
All right, I hate to interrupt. But
Thanks for coming to our dog and blue cheese panel.
we're at time, but I'm going to ask one more question because I can.
Speed round.
Before they start signaling to me in the back. So everyone is going to go out there and buy these 2 books and then go talk to them at the table over there, or go to the library and place it on hold or get it on Libby. But after you do that, what other books about marriage, memoirs, novels should we all read?
I like Fire Sermon by Jamie Quattro. It's a great book. It's short.
She was here a couple years ago.
Yeah,
Festival.
she's a Southern writer, great writer. I love that one. What else? I mean, there's always, Anna Karenina.
I would recommend, Deborah Levy has this series, a 3-part series called A Living Autobiography. You've all got to go read it. But I'm also reading an old book that's been reprinted by the New York Review of Books, Diana Attill's Don't Look at Me, which happens to be about an affair. And it's really great, and it lets you see the other perspective. And when I see the other perspective from Diana Attill's point of view, I'm like, oh, of course, have affairs. They're wonderful. It's real love.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Is a play, but that one's good.
Is that a signal in the back? Should we stop talking?
Well,
Yeah.
all right, let me say thank you to Hannah and Harrison for sharing your truth and your art with us. Thank you to the Oxford American Magazine. There's some folks from the OA here for sponsoring the session, for publishing these guys early in their career, helping launch them. And thank you to all of you for coming, and I hope we can continue this conversation out at the signing table.